For half a century, WJPZ Syracuse has been the greatest media classroom on the planet.
We've trained students from the 1970s to the 2020s on how to run a professional radio station.
But the lessons learned and relationships formed go far beyond studios and transmitters.
Taking a look back through the eyes of those who experienced it.
This is WJPZ at 50.
Welcome to WJPZ at 50. I am John Jagay. Today's guest grew up in Syracuse. She's been around radio her entire life, and she was one of my absolute favorite people until we did some math a couple weeks ago and realized that she may have been listening to me on the WJPZ while she was on her middle school bus on the way to school, but I won't hold it against her. From the class of 2010, welcome Lauren Corriher, formerly Lauren Levine. Hello.
Hi, Jag. Thanks for having me.
So you have kind of a unique origin story in how you got to Syracuse and how you got to the station. Let's start at the beginning.
I do, yeah. So I grew up in Syracuse. We moved there when I was about 6. My family is in the radio business. My dad owns a group of radio stations in Syracuse and Utica called Galaxy Media. So I was both Syracuse and radio adjacent, basically since I could talk. So it felt like a natural fit to join JPZ when I went to Syracuse.
You told me previously, though, growing up, you didn't know it was a student-run radio station. You said you got into an argument with your dad about this.
Yes. So when we were on the bus on the way to both middle school and high school before I could drive, the bus driver would play the Z Morning Zoo. And he would alternate between, Ted and Amy and Hot 107 and the Z Morning Zoo. So I just thought okay, these are our radio stations in my market. That makes sense. And I was at home. I remember this very clearly. We were at the dinner table and the zoo had done some sort of prank or something that, 13-year-old me thought was hilarious. And so I was telling my dad about it and he was like, oh, those are the kids from Syracuse University. And I was like, no. We listen to this, we listen to Ted and Amy, we listen to Hot 107, it's one of those stations. And he was like, no, I know, but those are college kids. You could be on that station at Syracuse. And of course, every 12, 13-year-old thinks their parent is an idiot, even if they work in the business. So I was like, Dad, you are a moron. You don't know what you're talking about. And so I forget how he proved it to me, but finally he did show me yes, this is a student station. And I was like, oh my gosh, I obviously thought these people were professionals. They know what they're doing.
Well, so if you were listening to Marty and Peterman and Emily and whoever was on around my era at that time, again, before you had your own license, we will take that compliment very highly.
100%. Whoever the combination was, you were very entertaining and very professional. So snaps to you.
I'll pass that along to my classmates. So
please do.
But I'd imagine before that you were even thinking about Syracuse as a school because it's in your backyard, right?
Well, it was interesting. So both of my parents went to Syracuse, went to Newhouse. They met there my mom's freshman year, my dad's sophomore year. So it had always been kind of in my brain that, Syracuse is a great school. They have a really good communications program. But, no kid wants to go. I was 30 minutes from my Haven Hall freshman year dorm. No one really wants to do that. So I toured Ithaca College. I toured Quinnipiac University, Boston University. I was determined to not go to school in Syracuse. And then I went back for another tour of Newhouse and I was like, man, I really like this school. It just feels professional. I wanted that college campus feel. And, Boston University is great, but you're in Boston. You don't have a quad.
Your campus is Commonwealth Avenue, yeah.
Right. So I'm like, okay, Syracuse has that college vibe. They have a lot of activities. They have a lot of really well-respected people. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go to Syracuse and make it my own experience. And to my parents' credit, they never showed up at my dorm. It was not, oh, surprise, we're here to check and make sure you're not drinking or whatever. They were very respectful of those boundaries. And I really do think life as a Syracuse University student is very different than growing up in Manlius, where I grew up. It felt like a very different city. And that campus kind of becomes its own universe anyway. So it doesn't really matter, oh, I'm 3,000 miles from home, I'm 30 minutes from home. When you're in the dorm or when you're at Z, you're in your own world. So I loved it, obviously.
It's really funny you say that because there have been several people we've had on the podcast that worked in the Syracuse market as alumni, and they had the opposite experience because they were like, okay, living in Syracuse in the Syracuse market is way different than being in your little bubble up on the hill. But you had been exposed to the greater market and then you went to the hill. So you had the exact opposite.
I did. And it's so funny. I would go to Carousel Mall. Well, now it's Destiny, but Carousel Mall at that time.
Yeah.
all the time with my friends when I was in high school. Like, that's what we would do every weekend. But when I lived on campus, I was like, we're going to go to Carousel? That's so far. Like, how are we going to get there? It's just like my whole frame of reference was so different, when I'm living up there as a student.
By the way, I'm probably glad for your sake you didn't go to BU. I can't imagine a Yankee fan would have been wanted that close to Fenway Park.
I probably would not have made any friends. It would not have been good.
Okay, so you're at Syracuse, and then I'd imagine you went to the JPZ pretty quickly after getting there?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. My freshman year roommate rushed a sorority, and I had been thinking, like, that's probably a good way to meet people. But when I looked into it, I was just like, I have nothing against sorority girls, but I did not feel like that was who I was. So I went to school thinking I'd be a TV reporter. So I'm like, I'm going to get involved with Citrus. Like, I'm going to go full in on that. But there was just something about Z, and like, I knew Z. I had grown up listening to Z, and I'm a radio kid. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to give that a try. And I was involved with Citrus, but I actually spent more of my extracurricular time at Z, even though I was so convinced I wanted to be a TV reporter. But it felt like home to me, always.
So you had the familiarity with it before you got to campus. Who are some of the people that were already there when you arrived that made it feel so much like home?
So and I forget, he'll have to correct me. I forget if Kevin Rich had just left or was still there, but he was one of the first like authority figures, like big bosses that I met. And I was like, okay, these people are cool. Like, I think I can get comfortable here. So I remember him being the GM, and he may have just left, but it was interesting. Like, that whole banquet experience my first year really kind of solidified my love for Z, because I was like, in what other organization can you meet people who are 20 years older than you and it's not like weird and creepy? Like, they just genuinely want to help you. It was a very cool feeling right away to know that I could call anybody, whether they currently worked at Z, had been gone for 10 years, were a year behind me. Like, I could ask any Z person for help, and it wouldn't be like, what do you want? Like, leave me alone. You know what I mean? It felt it had that sorority feel without the negatives that I was not interested in.
I felt the exact same way. I always headed into a frat. Z89 was kind of my frat.
Right, you don't need to. Why would you?
Because you have all that social interaction without whatever hazing was going on at the time that's probably illegal now.
And paying $6,000 or whatever that my parents would not have paid for.
Oh, geez, yeah. I didn't even get far enough to find out how much it cost.
Yep.
Lauren, what did you do at the station? Take me through your time there.
So I had a few different exec staff. I think I was like promotions director. I honestly, I can't really remember, but I remember I was on the exec staff from early on, and that mattered to me. That was important to me. So I went to school to be a TV reporter, as I said, and very quickly was like, this is not my jam. I was more interested in pop culture, celebrity life. And, I love Newhouse. I have nothing bad to say about Newhouse. But when you're in that program, I'm trying to say this delicately, if you're not a hardcore news person, you kind of can feel out of place sometimes. So being able to explore my pop culture side, my celebrity gossip side at Z and have that celebrated was really, really nice for me. And it felt very inclusive.
I would agree with that. I think, I was also broadcast journalism major, and I remember, by junior, senior year, we're putting together these newscasts at Newhouse, and I had classmates that were, okay, I'm going to get into TV news. I'm going to be a reporter. I'm going to be a producer, and that's what I'm going to do. And I was like, dude, that's great. Have at it. Gagazunt, as our people would say. Like, but I knew at that time, like, I think I'm going to do like the top 40 pop culture thing. I think this is kind of more my jam, as opposed to, if it bleeds, it leads. It was more like, right. Hey, I think I'll talk about Britney Spears and, Brad Pitt or whatever. So I totally understand what you're saying there.
Yeah, it was just more appealing to me. And I had always felt like I kind of had to bury that part of myself and be like, I'm a news person. I love the news. And then at Z, it was like, oh, yeah, you like Britney Spears? Okay, cool. Like, there is a place for you here. And I'm like, oh, I found my people, finally.
Finding your people and inclusivity throughout 50 years has just been a theme that's come up in almost every single one of these podcasts. It's just this inclusive group of no matter how old you are, but also no matter what you're interested in. It's like, hey, come on in, welcome.
Yes, it was very cool because I never felt like I had to go to the station like dressed a certain way. Like, I could go in my sweatpants. It was not a judgy space. And that was really important to me because with a school as big as Syracuse, like, you never know who you're going to be running into and what kind of an impression you want to be making. But like at Z, it's like, okay, these are my people. And even if I haven't met Joe Schmo specifically, like, he's at Z, so he is my people too. So it felt very welcoming and just not pretentious.
Very well said. So you kind of realize you're not going to be the TV news reporter. You're more into the pop culture side of things. Walk me through what you did since graduation.
Yeah, so I've been working for my parents' company. I started working for my parents' company, Galaxy Media, right after I graduated. I took a brief pause because I'm a writer at my core. That's who I am. And so I took a brief pause to take a job doing reputation management writing, which if you don't know, this is a sort of a side story.
She saw the perplexed look on my face and she's like, okay, I should probably explain this a little bit.
Yeah. So reputation management writing, if you don't know, which most people don't, if you do something bad, you own a restaurant and there's a salmonella outbreak. Well, all of a sudden, if people are Googling, John Gay, and they're like, oh my gosh, this guy in his restaurant, no way. I would create a bunch of content about John Gay is a volunteer firefighter. John Gay loves dogs. And then all of a sudden, when people are Googling your name, they're not finding out about the not so great things.
One of those two previous statements is true, I should bet.
Yes, exactly. So I always kind of felt like I was using my writing powers for evil and not good. And so that was tough for me. But it did get me to Charlotte because the company was based right outside of Charlotte. So blessing in disguise. So I moved here and like 4 months later, the company closed down.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So I had moved from Syracuse to Charlotte. Now I'm unemployed. So I actually went to the CBS radio, which is now owned by Beasley. And I was going to get a job there. I was, they had a lot of opportunity that's right in Charlotte. And so I talked to my dad and I was like, yeah, I'm going to go interview at CBS. It's going to be great. And he's like, well, I thought you wanted to leave radio to do writing. If you're going to get back into radio, why not work with your family? I'm like, okay, that's kind of a fair point.
Ah.
So I've been working remotely and I love it because I get to do writing for my family's company and also get to pursue freelance writing. So I've parlayed that into a career. I write for Southern Living. I write for Charlotte Magazine, places like Parents Magazine, Health Magazine. So I get to explore that interest and also work with my family and get the radio itch scratched too. So it's the best of both worlds.
It's funny, but you mentioned the Southern Living because my next question was going to be if you felt the need after having grown up in Syracuse, having gone to Syracuse to sort of spread your wings and go explore somewhere else and see what it's like to live somewhere else. Here you are, snow girl from Syracuse, and you're writing for Southern Living magazine. Tell me about the change in culture going down there.
So I remember when I applied for this job, they said they were based in Charlotte, but you could work remotely. And I remember saying to my mom, I'm going to apply for this job. There's no way I will ever live in Charlotte. Like that, hillbillies, rednecks, I'm not doing it, but I want to write. And so I came down for a company Christmas party. And I've lived here almost 10 years. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a really cool city. Like it feels very cosmopolitan, but it feels manageable. And I had been kind of thinking, maybe I want to see someplace other than Syracuse. Obviously, I love Syracuse, but as you said, wanted to spread my wings. So I'm like, I have a job where I kind of know people because I know my coworkers. So why not try living in Charlotte for a little while? And then if I hate it, they don't ban you from returning to Syracuse or living somewhere else. So I was like, I'll give it a year and we'll see. And that was almost a decade ago.
And you ended up meeting your husband down there.
I met my husband online on Bumble here. I'm like, I don't know what online dating is going to be like, but let's give it a shot. So yeah, and he's very Southern. His family all lives here. And I never, in my mind, would have thought that I would have fit in with Southern culture, but it's so welcoming. And obviously, it's 50 degrees. I'm sure it's snowing in Syracuse. There's just a lot of perks about living in the South.
I will say, full disclosure, you and I have an inside joke from when I lived in New Orleans, which is now almost 10 years old. Whenever one of us finds a Southern cockroach, we usually end up texting each other about it.
Jag, the cockroach thing, that is my one hang up. So I probably told you this story. This is a 100% true story. I arrived in Charlotte, North Carolina. I drove the 12 hours down, drove my little Corolla. I had a roommate, opened the door to the apartment. Oh, this is so exciting. I'm living on my own. This is great. And this is 100% true. I had been in Charlotte for probably 2 hours. And all of a sudden, something comes flying from behind the refrigerator, past my head.
Oh, jeez.
And I was like, what was that? And my roommate was from North Carolina, so she was well aware. And she's like, oh, it's just a roach. Hang on, I'll get a fly swatter. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it was a what? Because my family is from New York City. To me, that's dirty, filthy infestation.
Right.
And so I see this huge thing flying. It was the size of a small dog. And I'm like, that's an insect? What are you talking about? And so she just smashed it there was no big deal. And I called my mom hysterical. And I was like, I have made a grave mistake. Something from Jurassic Park is in my apartment. What am I? Can I go back to Syracuse? I'd rather shovel snow. And, it is still an issue. I still have my issues with them, but that is my biggest Southern hang up is the bug situation. But that's why God invented raid and exterminators, and we're good.
You and I have bonded over that over the years because I was in New Orleans when you first came to Charlotte, and we're like, what is going on? What are we doing in the South? We're a couple of Northern folks. What is going on down here?
We don't do that in the North. It's too cold. Those things can't survive. It's very different.
Someone told me New Orleans keep my apartment at 68 degrees or colder, and if I did, they would stay away. And for the most part, in 3 years, they did. And I kept it as clean as I possibly could. So
I've tried bay leaves. Oh, if you ever need like a roach trick, I know everything about them. I'm like an expert. It's a whole thing.
Lauren, talk to me about some of the relationships that you formed while you were at JPZ and maybe some lessons that you learned while you were at the station that have served you well in your career since graduation.
So I keep talking about how I've been able to be friends with people of all different ages. And I think that is so cool because I can seek life advice from people who have been there ahead of me. I can give life advice to people who are coming up behind me. For example, Mike Cousins, who is the GM of Z when I was there, I can't remember the exact years, but when I was there, is now one of my best friends. And we were always friendly at Z and had a good relationship. But, he was doing sports. He was younger. I was doing my celebrity red carpet stuff. But we reconnected, and he and his wife live about 10 minutes from us now. Like, we hang out all the time. And it was like, I think because we had that foundation of Z89, like, it was easy to kind of reconnect and build on that versus just trying to find some random stranger like, oh, you went to Syracuse too. Well, I wouldn't know you if I ran you over, but like, I'm sure we were there at the same time. So it was easier to build a friendship. And then, of course, you and I have been close forever. I'm scared to list people because I know I'm going to forget somebody. Kay Ridge, Michelle Buckwalter and I have been friends for years. Katie Leeds and I, Nikki, like there's just so many different people, so many different personality types. And then it's like you come together with this common ground and you see each other at banquet or whatever the case may be. And it's like no time has passed. And
it's funny, you talk about it doesn't matter, age difference, whatever. I remember one year I was it's always somebody every year that gets snowed in Syracuse and has a yes. flight disaster leaving Syracuse trying to get back to wherever they were going to. And I think it was when I was living in New Orleans. U.S. Airways, RIP U.S. Airways, they rebooked me, and it ended up being like Syracuse to Charlotte to New Orleans, and it was going to take like the whole day to get there on Monday. And I had like a 7-hour layover in Charlotte, but it was the only way to get home. I called Lauren. I'm like, hey, what are you doing on Monday? And she's like, oh, Jack, I'll come pick you up at the airport. We come hang out. And we went and we got lunch and we hung out for a while. I was like,
it was perfect.
But like, that's the relationship of JPZ that like I felt totally comfortable like reaching out.
You and I were not in school together, but I was like, awesome, that's great. And I think that's a really, really special thing that not a lot of other organizations provide.
Lauren, a minute ago, you mentioned the red carpet report, which was not there when I was in school. That started years later. Tell me about how that got started.
Yeah, so I was talking about, this love of celebrity pop culture that I had, and I was kind of ashamed of it. But when I came to Z, I suggested this idea, like, okay, obviously other people like this too. Otherwise, TMZ and E! News would not exist. So I created a show called The Red Carpet Report, and I worked with Alex Brewer on it, who's an amazing human being. And I'm 99% sure it still exists today, which is so cool because think about, back then it was Britney and Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan, and now it's TikTok and people I'm too old to even know, but like that love of pop culture is still there. And I think that's amazing.
It really is. I'm familiar with the Red Carpet Report. I hadn't realized that it was you and your class that had started that. So props to you.
It was. And, I did my normal on-air shifts and stuff. So actually the first time I was going to be on air at Z, I remember this like it was yesterday. I was so nervous. I was so excited. I had written down word for word all of my talk breaks, even though my dad told me not to. And so, like, let's say I was going to be on at noon. I'm telling my parents at 11:55, it's coming up. You got to listen to me. So they're both listening, pretending they're hundreds of miles away when they're literally just down the street. And so it's my time and I turn the microphone on and I do my talk break. I'm so excited. And then I play the next song and I call my mom and dad and I'm like, how was it? How did it sound? And they're like, well, it was good, but like, I don't really think you turned the mic all the way up. So it kind of just sounded like whispering over our music bed.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this was like my big break and I just froze and I didn't know what to do. But again, the cool thing about Z, like, it's not a big deal. It happens all the time. Like, it is a great place to learn and experiment and learn how to be on the radio or create content and not feel ashamed if you make a rookie mistake, which all of us have done.
Oh, I can tell you about plenty of mistakes I've made. Any other funny stories that you remember from your time at Z?
So for a brief time when I was on exec staff, we were trying to do like club nights. Mm-hmm. And, I had never been to a club. I didn't have a fake ID or anything. So I got to like go to a club in downtown Syracuse under the guise of official Z89 business. And so that was definitely an eye-opening experience. It was certainly a good preparation for when I started going to Chuck's and all that. But yeah, that was definitely helped me see the world.
Well, Lauren, you're a great friend, and you are, of course, a valuable alum. You've provided advice to so many alums. I know when I interviewed Mike, he talked about how you and your husband Brad have been wonderful friends to them in Charlotte. And then, of course, I know you've talked to plenty of alumni younger than you and offered career advice to them as well. I just want to thank you for taking a few minutes with us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. And if anyone's listening, I'm always happy to help talk about radio, writing, anything I can help with. I'm more than glad to do it.
Probably not talk about Syracuse basketball and football at the moment.
Yeah, except for that. We could probably skip that part.
All right. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, Jag.
The WJPZ at 50 podcast is created entirely by the staff and alumni of the world's greatest media classroom.
It's hosted by John Jag Gay, class of 2002. Editing help from James Bames Grundy III, class of 2020.
Imaging by Maureen Cooper, class of 1999.
And Ed Lacombe, class of 1985.
Podcast artwork by Marty Dundix, class of 2001.
Follow WJPZ at 50 on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube,
or wherever you're listening right now.